I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to Knock Once for Yes. We are back, finally. Bringing you this latest episode has definitely been a bit of a roller coaster. It felt like the universe threw every obstacle it could think of in our way, and then on top of that, we stupidly chose to write an episode on the most complicated and in-depth topic we have so far researched. But we made it, and we learned a few valuable lessons along the way. For example, don't attempt to cover an entire category of paranormal phenomena in one episode. Whose idea was that again?
Mine. It was mine. I'm sorry.
Fitz takes full responsibility. Well, if you know anything about us, you'll know that our episodes have been getting progressively longer as the years have gone on. And this time we finally maxed our capacity and have had to bust out of our usual format. So instead of one episode, we're bringing you two. You will still have all of your favourite segments, but bigger, better, and, well, in two halves, really. So what's coming up in this episode is ghost stories. Yep, stories, more stories. We're bringing you a bumper edition of everything we'd normally have in the first half of the show as one episode, and giving our main segment, which is a journey through the weird and wonderful world of screaming skulls, an entire second episode to itself. Because we worked really hard on that narrative and we didn't really want to split it up, but we never realised it would be 2 hours long on its own. So before we get stuck into all of that, we of course want to say a massive thank you to our latest patrons.
Julia Lynch,
Alison Scott,
Emma B,
Krista Deploy,
and Emily. And we'd also like to thank Pat Davies and Kat for making donations through KOFY.
As always, thank you so much to all of our supporters, old and new, on Patreon, KOFY and Repod. We really couldn't do this without you. Because of your amazing support, we've been able to grow this show from the little tiny bean of a podcast to the format-busting monster it's becoming today. We're so grateful for your patience whilst we dealt with some obstacles, scheduling nightmares, and over-enthusiastic script writing recently. Some of this is because we're making a big push at the moment and really pouring every spare moment of our time that we're not working our 9-to-5 jobs into making this into the fully fledged professional show we've always wanted it to be. Behind the scenes, we're working away on ideas to bring you more and more regular content. But like everything in life, that doesn't come without its growing pains. But we're so proud of what we've achieved in our first 5 years and so grateful to our supporters for helping us to get this far. But now, enough of me getting all reflective. Let's get on with the show. Fitz, do you want to share something weird that happened recently?
Yes, we've had quite a few weird things going on here recently, both at KOFY HQ and abroad, and we'll be sharing some of the things that have been going on here with our patrons fairly soon. But one of the things that's been going on recently has basically meant that we've been at the vets a lot. I've spent a lot of time either at the vets or on the phone to the vets. And normally you go through this system. If you ring them up, you go through the automated service, you wait on hold. There's the ding-a-ding-a-ding noise, music. The music as you're waiting to speak to somebody. And so far, so normal. But there was one time I rang up and in the middle of the music, there was this like staticky electrical noise. And I heard someone say, "Chris." And then it went... And then it went back to normal. But the music didn't stop. It wasn't that somebody had picked up and that they'd said something. The music was still there. This was on top of the music.
Oh.
And it's never happened before. It's never happened since. I was a bit weirded out, so I hung up and I called them back about 10 minutes later. Got to the same point in the music, so it plays from the same place every time. So I knew how long I'd been on and it was past the point that it had happened. So it wasn't like they'd re-recorded it and it was weird. Don't know. But it was really strange. Made the hair on my arm stand up when I heard it.
Yeah, and like you say, we're on the phone to the vets a really obscene amount of the time. Like, it happens a lot. They're kind of sick of us, truth be told. So we're really familiar with the recording that plays with the music. But like you say, I didn't actually realise that when you told me, because my first thought was, of course, well, did somebody pick up the phone and take it off hold? But if the music was still playing underneath, then it wasn't. It never came off hold.
No,
nobody could have picked up the phone.
No. that, like I say, the music was there the whole time. It was underneath the crackly speech, but it was still there.
Yeah, that's really, really weird.
Very strange.
Could be a ghost phone call, perhaps.
Indeed. So I might have to surreptitiously ask the vet next time I'm in there who Chris is.
Well, the thing is, it is an old building, isn't it?
And it's been a vet since the late 1800s, I think.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure whether it's still there, but certainly for many, many years, even since I was a child, they've had a display case in the vets of an old vet's bag, like a leather, almost, if you watch All Creatures Great and Small, something like that, but even older. Yeah, even older than that. This leather vet's back case, essentially, with all the old like stethoscope and a book of medical notes and some other bits and pieces from the 1800s, from when it originally opened as a vet. And I think, they are genuine artifacts from that particular vet. So it wouldn't surprise me if there is something going on there.
Very strange. Well, we'll keep you updated if we have any more weird phone calls at the vets. But moving on, I think, Lil, you've got a Paranormal Radar story for us.
I do indeed. And you all know how much we love our haunted properties for sale, but we've got something a little bit different for you today. A haunted pub looking for a new landlord. The Osnaburg Bar in Forfar, the county town of Angus, is said to be one of the most haunted pubs in Scotland. The pub was established in 1835, but the building itself is older and once housed a weaver's shop. Historically, the town of Forfar was heavily involved in the weaving industry, and it's this influence that gave the pub its name, Osnaburg being a term for a particular type of plain weave fabric that's still used today. It seems that the spooky reputation doesn't put off the patrons, though. The pub, known locally as The Oz, is advertised as being amongst the most popular in the town, with opportunities to thrive as a community hub under the management of the right publican, just as long as they don't mind the ghosts. Apparently, members of staff have experienced plenty of unexplained activity over the years, including being bothered by a spirit who's said to lurk in the cellar. Floating shadows have also been seen, but the main reports seem to be strange sounds with no apparent cause. The Scottish paranormal team were able to experience this activity for themselves on their 2014 investigation of the pub, during which they heard whistles, bumps, and thuds for which they could find no explanation. So, if you're looking for a career change, or you're already a pub landlord and fancy taking the helm of one of Scotland's most paranormally active bars, then the Green King owners assure prospective new publicans that the building is in fantastic condition, has oodles of potential to become a thriving business, and are offering a bargain rent of only £75 a month for the first 3 months to get you going. So, what do you reckon, Fitz? New Coffee HQ?
Oh, it is tempting. It's very tempting, but seeing as I can't actually drink at the minute...
that is true.
I think
that's a bit of a downer. But Scotland, though, I mean...
it is beautiful.
Yep.
But perhaps in the middle of building a brand new studio isn't the best time to be moving to Scotland.
No, that's a good point. Fair enough. Well, with all that said, shall we get into our first story of the episode? And this one is from Joe.
My dad wanted to start a family business, so at 30 years old, I moved back to the family home and agreed to work for no pay to help save money. I moved back into my sister's old room as my old room was being used as storage, and it's worth noting that this was before all the ghost hunting shows were on TV. I noticed a few things at first. While in bed, I would hear what sounded like someone walking on the hardwood floor of the room, but when I opened my eyes, there was no one there, and I always kept the door locked. What happened next, I had to play detective to figure out, and it took a while. If I left the closet door open with the lights off, I'd wake up with the closet lights on. It happened like clockwork. If I left the door closed, nothing would happen. Now, if I left the closet door open and the lights on, I'd wake up to the sound of someone coughing, and that did pique my interest. I did it a few times off and on for a few weeks, and the coughing would always happen, and I mean always. After a few weeks of doing it every day and the coughing happening, one day he appeared. An old man with checked pattern shirt, suspenders and tan pants, sitting in the corner of my room on a chair. I thought it was just a dream, but it happened 3 nights in a row, and that's not all. One night I forgot to turn the closet lights off and went to sleep. I woke up to the familiar sound of coughing, and the old man sitting on the chair threw the pillow that I always kept on the chair at me. I wasn't scared, and the coughing and the lights hadn't shocked me before, but this did. For a few days I kept the door closed and wondered if it had really happened. And then one day I decided to leave the door open and the lights on and place the pillow on the top shelf of the closet. I woke up that night and he threw the pillow at me and faded away again. I asked my sister if anything strange had happened to her in her old room, and she said no. When I explained what had happened to me, she laughed at me. It happened a few more times after that, but then stopped, other than the coughing. So I decided to do some research on the house. I found out it was built as a show home in the early 70s, and the owner lived in part of the house. He also died in the house when he was 80 years old. And guess where he died? In the room I slept in, and in the closet. I found it odd that the newspaper mentioned where he died, but it answered a few questions. He was supposed to have died late at night, so it makes sense to me that that's when he shows up, coughing, when the lights are on. I moved out a few months later because I left the family business. Prior to this experience, if you told me that you'd seen a ghost, I'd have thought you were crazy. Every once in a while, I'll have a dream that I was back in that room, reliving it again.
And thank you so much to Joe for sharing that experience with us. This is an odd one because you've got all the components of, what do you call it? Like a haunting where the person's just replaying, like a stone tape theory. That's the word I'm looking for. Stone tape haunting where the person's just replaying what happened to them around the time of their death or, you know, things that they did all the time in life. But then you've got this weird left field like interaction. Yeah. With throwing the pillow at the witness.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was like the same. It feels like, you know, he's triggering it by doing certain things that set it off. And then, as you say, it's weird that it then sort of has the consciousness or reactivity to respond to what he's doing and throw things at him.
I wonder how that works because, like you said about triggering, so you're right. He's mentioned in the story that he thinks the act of having the light on or off at certain times is just, you know, recreating the environment where these events originally happened, and that is triggering this kind of stone tape replay of events. But then it switches at some point from just a replay into something conscious. And I just can't, what was the trigger for that? Although I now wonder, because it's interesting that Joe said his sister never saw anything in that room, didn't have any experiences. So I wonder then if the ghost throwing the pillow was just a reaction because he suddenly realised that Joe could see him, and it was a surprise after perhaps all those years of just bimbling around and nobody noticing that he was there.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that some people can see things and others can't, even if it's there. But also, it seems like he's triggered something by doors, lights, and, you know, maybe she just didn't leave the light on ever or shut the door all the time, or
could be just a perfect store of environmental factors that kind of works together to create something. We'll never know.
Indeed. It's time now for our next listener story, and this one is from Pascale.
Last summer, my boyfriend and I decided to get away from Paris for a short trip to Arles in Provence. the town brings together an unusual set of characteristics. It's particularly famous for its contemporary photography festival and its impressive, well-preserved Roman ruins, an arena, a theatre, and the Cryptoporticus, a subterranean passageway whose vaulting supported the forum that used to be just above, all dating from the 1st century BC, as well as Roman baths and an acropolis just outside the city dating from the 4th century. Arles was also the brief home of Vincent van Gogh, at a time that is now considered one of his most creative periods. There, he painted works like the Terrasse de Café le Soir and the bedroom. The town is known too for being the gateway to the pink salt marshes of the Camargue, in turn famous for its wild black rice, white horses, and flamingos. All this to say, I knew Arles had a rich history, but of course only by being in a place can you begin to sense the many layers of time that colour it. The apartment we stayed in was just off the road that follows the River Rhône. It was part of a small old stone building, like all houses in the area, that was set around a courtyard. The apartment itself was above part of the house belonging to our hosts. It was a nice, eclectic apartment, full of objects to look at and dark red rugs from Algeria, where one of our hosts was originally from. The first thing I noticed was how dim it was, as during the day we had to close all the wooden shutters to keep out the heat of the sun. Before we left, we were also invited to visit the host's house below. The living room directly below our flat, also covered in red rugs, was even darker, so much so that I found it a bit heavy. The only thing was, our mezzanine bedroom wasn't so reassuring to sleep in. On the wall right next to the bed were 2 arches stapled over with fabric, presumably leading to some kind of attic above the flat, although not being able to see didn't help. After one night, and by the end of the first full day, however, I remember feeling that if there was something unsettling, it wasn't really the bedroom. There was a feeling that seemed to rise up from below the mezzanine somehow. Being in the bed, I almost expected someone to come up the stairs and pop their head round the banister. But I put this down to sleeping in a clearly very old building. Anyway, nothing actually out of the ordinary happened until the morning of our second full day. We'd just finished breakfast and were discussing our trip to the beach next to the Camargue. My normally calm, relaxed boyfriend was getting a bit stressed because we'd just missed the bus that we were meant to catch. I left the table to get ready in the bathroom just next to the kitchen space. Several minutes later, I heard a loud, smashing sound. I came out of the bathroom to see my boyfriend looking very out of sorts, and he is a down-to-earth person who's not easily scared or carried away. He told me that he had turned away from the table to put the map in his bag, and, as he had done so, a glass that was on the other side of the table had smashed onto the floor. It was a thick IKEA-style tumbler that had broken into tiny, tiny pieces. Even though he said he hadn't touched the table, we agreed that maybe it had just slid off somehow. Though, when we put another glass on that side of the table, nudged the table, rattled the chair, jumped on the stone floor, of course, it didn't move. I then noticed a trace about the width of the glass on the wood of the table. It started about where the glass had been and led to the edge of the table as if the sliding motion had scratched the wood. Still, we rationalised that it was probably nothing. I was fine, though my boyfriend was in a terrible, strange mood for the rest of the day. He said he just felt irritated and couldn't shake it off. That night, I woke up at about 2 a.m. needing to go to the loo. My boyfriend woke up too as I got out of bed. I went down the stairs to the living area, put my phone with the torch on the table, and walked past the kitchen area and into the bathroom. Just as I was on the loo, a very loud electrical beep came from the living area. I called out, very awake and quite scared, to my boyfriend, who had heard it too. It sounded like the fire alarm on the ceiling above the stairs being tested, or maybe a bit like the sound the fan made when being turned on. Or perhaps it was something tripping. I began to make my way back to the bedroom, and as I got to the bottom of the stairs, I felt a very strange sensation. Specifically, I felt a whoosh through my head, as if I was feeling a sound. It was as though I had met something on its pathway, going in the opposite direction to me towards the kitchen area, and that it had gone right through me. I then had a strange, distinct feeling, and the only way I can describe it is that I had somehow opened up the doors of communication with something. I'd never felt that before. I decided not to say anything to my boyfriend for the time being. We began having a chat to reassure ourselves when we heard what sounded like crockery being moved around in the sink. It lasted only a few seconds, but needless to say, it took us a little while to get back to sleep. The next morning after breakfast, I went to the bathroom and again, as my boyfriend wasn't watching, after a few minutes, the press of the cafetiere rolled off the other side of the table. I couldn't face another night like the last, especially as it was our last night, so I decided to try to speak to whatever it was. I said something along the lines of, "If anyone is there, tonight will be our last night here. Just please don't scare us again. I promise we're leaving tomorrow and we won't bother you again." Well, we had a peaceful night. We left in the afternoon of the next day and wondered if we should mention anything to our hosts about our funny experience. We met one of them just as we were leaving, and we told her that we had broken a glass, but that it wasn't exactly us. She immediately said, with a kind of twinkle in her eye, "Oh, she didn't scare you too much, I hope." She explained that several people, though not her, had heard strange things. They had also once invited a psychic to stay. She told them that the spirit of an old woman was haunting the living room in their house directly below our flat. And our host said that, in fact, our flat had, a long time ago, been part of their house. I'm not sure whether our experience was supernatural or just a string of feelings, coincidences, and reactions. I'm quite skeptical about the existence of ghosts, and I think that a lot of time these experiences come from somewhere within us too, as humans. But that doesn't make them less strange. When we got back, I was pleased to see that they had written us a nice review, which included a phrase about how we were open to the world of the strange and peculiar. I do wonder, though, if the place of Arles had also set the scene somehow. Aside from sensing the layers of time in the place, I realised for the first time how Provence as a region likes to think of itself as separate from the rest of France, with its own history more closely tied to that of ancient Greece and Rome, and with its own historical language, Provençal, that gives the place an unfamiliar, special quality. Arles fascinated me. I suppose history is a story, and I wonder whether being in a place so full of history means that stories come more easily.
And thank you to Pascale for sharing that story. That was a really interesting one, and my favourite part was the host that was like, "Oh, I hope she didn't bother you too much."
I know, I love it when that happens. It's the best.
But yeah, I love the fact that it's almost like she's part of the family. Like, "Oh, don't mind her, she's fine." It's just, don't worry about it. It's not something that's scary or is going to hurt you, but it's just,
yeah, we know, don't worry.
Yeah, accept it. It's part of the family, and I kind of love that.
I do. It's great, and honestly, Arles is now on the top of our bucket list of places to go because it sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it thoroughly resonated with me, what you were saying about the layers of history and the history kind of being so close to the surface that these stories just want to come out. And I really do think that's true. I do think that there are certain places where the history just it's so embedded in the culture, and it's not just been buried under kind of layers of time and layers of concrete, and it's still so present. I just feel like it's easier for the time zones to maybe not stay in quite the alignment they're meant to.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of these things, they're kind of a constant. Like, you might have had some stone that's been worked by the Romans and then it's been incorporated into a house and that's been
that
demolished and
happens a
reclaimed.
lot.
And,
Yeah.
The stuff that might even be in what you might think of as a fairly modern house may go back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Oh yeah, definitely. We see that all the time over here where we've got Roman occupation. The stone from the Roman buildings were used all through villages.
Mhm.
Any village that's got Roman occupation at some time, you will find that half of the buildings in that village will have reused Roman stone, and it's used again and again and again and again, and it just gets spread through the whole area. And I bet this is no different. I bet there's ancient stone in so many of those buildings, even if they feel more modern.
Mhm.
The other thing that I had to note was Pascale's description of it was as though I was feeling a sound. And I know exactly what you mean. It's just such a good way of describing it, that whoosh, that there really isn't a better way of describing it. And it's something that I've just never managed to do, I don't think, myself. But as if you're feeling a sound just really struck a chord with me. And I've had that experience. So I completely know what you mean, and well done for summing it up. And there was one more thing I just wanted to bring up, and it's where Pascale is talking about being quite skeptical about ghosts and wondering whether somehow the place itself just set the scene and whether ghosts could potentially come from within us as humans. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, to be honest. And what I would say is that I could completely see how being in somewhere this special, where the history feels so close to the surface, where you've got this kind of sense of otherness that you just don't get in mundane environments like work and at home that you're used to. I can firstly see how that might just make you more receptive to things that you wouldn't normally experience. But I can also see how if it is possible to project ghosts, and that is a theory kicking around and has been for a very long time, that would be the place where it would work very well with that atmosphere that you've got from Arles.
You see, I thought you were going to pick up on the fact that there was crockery being moved in the kitchen because you've had the same experience.
Oh, I definitely have. Yes. In one of my childhood homes, we had that exact same thing. And everybody in the house heard it at one time or the other. It would normally be when we were upstairs, and we would know categorically that there was nobody downstairs, but we would hear somebody bumbling around, just clinking crockery. So yeah, that part definitely resonated as well. So thank you so much again to Pascale for sharing that incredible story with us. And now we have another one for you. This story is from Bob.
My now ex-wife and I had been out for the evening to our favourite Italian restaurant, which was quite some miles away from home. So, it was after midnight that we were on our way back. I was driving down a road that was just a few minutes from home. The road was, oddly for our urban area, without streetlights. About halfway down the road, my headlights suddenly illuminated what I at first took for a big black bin bag on our side of the lane. Before I could stop, it became recognisable as a shaggy black dog just sitting there, looking off to the other side of the road. There was no time to do anything other than to continue over it, and we both felt the sickening thumps as it first hit the front spoiler, then on under the car. I hit the brakes, more so than I was already, and came to a halt a few more yards on. I checked that my wife was okay. She was in shock as it happened, and then jumped out to see what horrible mess there would be on the road behind. As an animal lover and pet owner, I was fearing the suffering of someone else's pet. I've seen one too many roadside tragedies that result from animal versus car. But to my utter amazement, there was no mangled body, nothing. I looked up to see, some couple of 100 yards back up the way we'd come, and under the only streetlight, the black dog, trotting away into a side road. Still fearing that it may have incurred internal injuries, I started walking in that direction to see if I could catch up with it and perhaps check that it didn't need a vet. At that point, a youngish man stepped out of the shadows towards me. I asked, "Did you see what happened?" He replied, "Oh yes, don't worry, he's always doing that. You can go on, he'll be fine." With that, he went on about his way, and I was left pondering as to what I should do next. Report it to the police? There was no evidence that an accident had even happened. So I went back to the car and we drove the next few minutes in silence. The next day, in daylight, I checked the car over and there was no damage to it anywhere, not so much as a speck of blood. I was still feeling worried and somewhat guilty for the poor thing for weeks afterwards, but eventually the event faded from memory. Now, in light of your talk of phantom dogs on a previous episode, I wonder if there was more to it, especially in light of the flippant attitude of the mystery youth and the casual trotting off of the black dog.
And thank you so much to Bob for sharing your experience with us. That is puzzling.
It is a very interesting one, isn't it?
I don't use the word puzzling very often, but this definitely calls for it.
See, I'm wondering whether the guy that said it'll be fine is a ghost as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's literally where I was about to go. It's almost as though Bob actually kind of drove into a bit of a, I was going to say time slip, and that's not quite right, into another space, somewhere where, a non-ordinary reality, something strange was going on there. Because where did that guy come from? What was he, just lurking in the shadows, ready to just walk out and go, "Don't worry, he's fine"? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Why would he know that there was a dog that just sort of laid in the road and then trotted off perfectly fine afterwards? It doesn't make any sense.
But it's the attitude as well. Like, imagine you've heard this, you live locally, you've heard the story about the dog that gets hit by cars all the time, blah, 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 and you just happen to be out at night for a walk and witness it for yourself. If I was there and somebody's, even if I'd researched it and I was like, oh, there's 100 accounts of this and it's very common, blah, 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 and I saw it and somebody's like, "Did you see that?" I'd be like, "Hell yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
I've heard about this before." And I'd be a bit more excited than that. Happens all the time. It's fine.
This is it. It's the attitude. It is so strange. Like you say, I mean, if it was us and it was a phenomena, even if it was something we had been sitting in the street waiting to happen, if it was an anniversary ghost and we were literally expecting it, that's still not the attitude that you'd have, is it?
No.
It's so peculiar.
It's weird. I mean, unless that guy has literally seen it like every night when he goes for a walk, it's just like, oh God, the thing again. Like, I can't imagine that being anyone's attitude to it.
No, I can't. It's just too strange. I mean, that cannot have been a corporeal dog.
No, but it's weird because, you often hear stories about people thinking they've hit some person.
Yes, loads.
And a lot of, some of them report that they saw them and felt them hit the car and others don't, but they still have to check.
There's no impact with others, yeah.
But yeah, the fact that he felt it and there was like a physical reaction to it and yet there was no damage to the car.
No, absolutely no sign. But you're right, it doesn't happen. Normally you have these stories of people seeing they're going to hit somebody. Sometimes you get an impact, sometimes you don't. But usually what happens after that is just there is nothing. There's no trace, there's no sign, there's no evidence. And in part that's true because there's no evidence on the car, there's no damage, there's no hair, there's nothing. Nothing at all to say anything's wrong. But he sees the dog just happily trotting off as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
And that is something that we don't come across very often.
No, something that's just sort of popped into my head is it's almost like it kind of wanted to stop you being further down the road.
Yeah.
Like, was there an accident or something you were going to get into? And it was just, this is the way I can get him to stop the car, wait here for 2 minutes and...
But what I'm thinking is, this obviously happens very regularly, or at least according to the very mysterious youth who may also be a ghost. He's saying this happens all the time. Is it a dangerous bit of road? Do people speed? Well, not that I'm implying Bob was speeding, but do you know what I mean? Is it a part of road where people perhaps need to take a corner more carefully or something like that? And this dog is almost like a guardian spirit of the road or something, and it's like a doggy speed bump. Literally a warning dog, because I know a lot of the black shuck stories that we've shared in the past is usually where a lot of the phantom dog stories come from. And oftentimes they are said to be a harbinger of doom, but actually an almost equal amount of time, they're a warning. They're
preventative. They're trying to stop you from getting into a situation.
Preventative is exactly the word. So potentially, could this dog have been preventing or is on a regular basis preventing something happening?
I like your supernatural speed bump.
So yeah, maybe this is just a kind of road guardian spirit. But I love it. This is a brilliant one. It's so peculiar.
So thank you again to Bob for sharing that story and all your other stories. We've got some more of Bob's stories, and I'm really excited to share some of them with you in future because I've read them and they're cracking.
They are. We're just trying to eke them out so we don't sort of get overexcited and share them all at once. Well, that was the last of the listener stories that we are going to read to you today, but that's not the end of the stories. We did promise you a bumper episode of Ghost Stories today, and that is what we're going to bring you. We have 3 more stories for you now, and these are the personal experiences of the lovely chaps over at the Belief Hole podcast, fellow paranormal podcasters who look into all things weird, spooky, and strange. And they've got some cracking stories that they've been kind enough to record for us. We're going to bring you those now. We're going to play them back to back to back and not interject like we normally do. We're going to come back for a little chat at the end. Enjoy.
Well, hello. I'm Jeremy.
I'm John.
And I'm Chris. And we are the brothers of the Belief Hole podcast. And if you like strange and mysterious stories and true terrifying tales of the unexplained, then you might like our show. You will love our show.
We hope you enjoy these bizarre experiences. These stories are true and they happen to us.
So if you enjoy peeling back the layers of our reality, check us out at beliefhole.com, YouTube, or wherever you get your paranormal podcasts. So we moved into our second home in Clinton, Ohio in 1993, and it had just been finished. In fact, it hadn't been completely finished. There was still some unfinished stairs in one part of the house. The lawn a lot of it was still dirt. They had filled in an old swamp that used to be the village sort of dumping ground in the 1800s. It's interesting because over the years, strange things would happen from time to time in that house throughout the years, just little unexplainable things that would be a little unsettling, some more mild than others. First experience I had that was bizarre and pretty terrifying in the moment was, it was a summer night and I was above the garage in what was then the family room. I think I was about 12 years old. And I was watching TV. One of those infomercials came on that would come on during summer movies in the 90s. And I was just kind of not really watching, just kind of dazed, waiting for the commercial break to be over. When suddenly, from behind me, a cup whizzed past my face and slammed into the TV in front of me. It was so close to my face that I heard the whiz and I felt the little drops of Diet Pepsi hit my face. I was frozen in fear in that moment because I knew that no one was sitting on the couch behind me when I came up, and I knew that there was no space between the couch and the wall. So there's no way that could have come from anyone in the room. But eventually I was able to rationalize that somehow my brother had come home from soccer. He'd come up the staircase, even though I would have seen him in my peripheral vision, coming up that staircase and sneaking behind the couch. But maybe I was distracted. Maybe I was just waiting for that commercial break to be over and just in that sort of meditative state. So I get up and I check, and of course, nobody there. So I go downstairs, no one home. I'm alone in that house. And I left that house immediately and sat in the yard for probably an hour and a half before someone came home. I didn't go in that room for probably a year. To this day, I still can't figure out how that cup could have moved through the room like that and so violently, with no way for someone to be in that room. I don't understand what that was, but it wasn't the only thing that happened in that house. Over a period of several years, weird things would happen. You'd have these long breaks of time where nothing happened, and then something terrifying or mild would happen. They would remind you that there was something going on there. There was a reef that had lifted itself off of the wall. One Christmas, there was experience my brother had in the basement with the refrigerator door opening and closing. But for me, this all came to a climax one night. This was the night that I had the most terrifying experience of my life. My eldest brother, John, had moved to go to college, so I got his room. And one night in that room, I woke up, but I wasn't sure why I woke up, but I knew it was because something happened in that room, in that moment. Something was there in that room. And I'm frozen. I can't move. I can move my eyes. I'm scanning the room to figure out where this feeling, this sensation, this presence is coming from. And in the doorway of my room is a tall, darker than night, black, featureless figure. And even though I couldn't see eyes, I felt it staring at me. That was part of the most unsettling and horrifying part of it, is I felt its intention was directed right at me, and that it had been for a while. Maybe while I was sleeping, it had been watching me, but it's as if I woke up in the middle of this thing, doing whatever it was doing. I could feel as if it was there for me and it knew who I was. It was there to petrify me, and it wanted me. For what, I don't know. Dread that's the word. Dread was the feeling. The most intense feeling of dread I've ever had. To this day, I've still never had this experience, this feeling of evil. True evil. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I don't know how long this went on, of this thing gazing at me and me struggling to try to move or scream. But eventually, I passed out and woke up the following morning and moved out of that room. Again, another room I couldn't go into for a long time. I don't know what it was with that house. You know, we had some experiences over the years, but the house itself didn't feel dark, except in those nights where things like that would happen. Every other day of the year, it felt like a home, like a warm space to be. And we did find in the front yard, years later, in the woods, a stone that looked hand-carved, that was sticking erect out of the ground with a name carved on it. And from years of being in the sediment and mud and rain, this stone, and it looked maybe like limestone, but the name that had been carved in there, or the word, had halfway dissolved on the bottom because it had settled underneath the top layer of soil. It either said Bessie or Betsy, to the best of our figuring. And we talked a lot about digging. We never did, mainly because we felt that if it was someone's grave, maybe an old family grave or whatever, you know, who are we to disturb it if it isn't the cause of what's going on in that house? Or even if it is, maybe, especially if it is, we don't want to dig that up. So it's still there. But those experiences would happen infrequently, but they happen enough that makes me wonder, is that property? Are there places in the world, is there something about the land in certain regions that are maybe on some other plane, some other astral dimension? Maybe that piece of land just happens to lay on a highway of activity, a highway of spirits or whatever traveling. And maybe our folks' place is on a piece of land that is in some other dimension or some other realm, just an old highway. It doesn't get used very often. And every so often, something passes through and stops in. Sometimes to play a trick, sometimes to terrify, maybe to feed off the energy, maybe to feed on us.
When I was in my late teens, I was finally old enough to start staying at home by myself, and my younger brothers were still forced to go to church camp during the summers. And I was fortunate enough to be able to convince my parents that I was a responsible young man and that I would take good care of the house. And little did they know, I had begun throwing parties at my house. It was a really nice house, kind of deep in the woods. We had no neighbors, and it was pretty spooky when you were there by yourself. And this particular night, I believe the parties had already happened, and there was a couple-day period where I was by myself, and I was just home alone. And at that time, I was sleeping in the basement. So I was in the middle of the woods by myself in this big house, sleeping in the basement. And nothing too weird had happened by myself. This is kind of a short experience, but it really freaked me out for a long time after this. So one night, I was sleeping downstairs. It was the middle of the night, and there's this refrigerator that is maybe 20 feet away from me, 30 feet in this little kind of cove just around the bend from the bed that I was in. And all of a sudden, I was in a dead sleep. I hear the sound of the refrigerator suctioning open. The door goes all the way open and then just closes. And the feeling of terror, I didn't even have a chance to think about it, the first one, because it happened again. I think it happened like 2 or 3 times right in a row, maybe within a minute. And I was so freaking horrified. Like, I couldn't even move for the rest of the night. I couldn't go look at it. I couldn't get out of bed. I don't even remember what happened after that. It was just pure terror, because there's nothing I could do about it. I knew something was happening, and it was just whatever was down there was trying to scare me, and it worked.
So this happened in the summer of 2008. Man, what a year. I had been living in San Francisco for a year, going to film school, and had recently reconnected with an ex-girlfriend, and had sort of lost my focus in California and decided to move back to Ohio to be with her and to kind of reconnect with people back home. And things didn't quite work out the way that I had planned. We ended up splitting pretty much when I got back. So there I was, no direction, no focus, living back with my parents. I was in a pretty bad way, drinking a lot of taco sauce from the bottle. Ugh. Just kind of adrift in life, and not knowing what my next step was going to be. Until something happened that was definitely life-changing for me. It was a warm night in the summer, and I was just kind of laying there, sort of drifting and trying to not think about the things that were causing me heartache. And I remember lying there and suddenly realizing that I couldn't move. And it wasn't frightening, really. It was just a strange sensation. My body was just immobile. It felt like I was in a warm bath almost. I remember that feeling. And as I was lying there, I began to feel this buzz move from my toes up through my body. The strangest sensation I'd ever felt. It was a vibrating buzz, tingling, and it was warm, and it came from the bottom of my feet up through my body and into my head. But it was a very calming, reassuring feeling. Not frightening. Not frightening until suddenly I realized that my perspective was drifting from my position in bed. I was no longer stationary staring at the ceiling. I was now drifting left. My field of vision was moving left as if I was strafing off of the bed. And I realized suddenly that I wasn't in my body anymore. And then I became frightened. And at that moment, it was like a rubber band slapped back right into my body, right into my field of view I was at before. And I immediately calmed down. Once I was back in, I wasn't frightened. I was just curious. What was that? And then the vibration picked up again. And my field of vision started to move again. I started to drift again, same direction. And this time I was like, what do I have to lose? I've got really nothing going on. And I was just, at this point, just fascinated in the experience of what was happening. So I'm floating through my room. I drift sort of towards the floor, and I remember being completely aware. There wasn't a moment where I had fallen asleep. I was very alert. I remember trying to push myself off the floor, and I did. I moved up, kind of slowly rebounded from the floor as if underwater. And I moved to the staircase, and I decided I was going to go try to make contact with someone in my home, my parents or my brother, in this state, in this floating state. So I moved down the stairs very deliberately, and I'm just floating. I remember I went to open the bedroom door at the bottom of the stairs, and I went through the doorway, through the closed door, and I continued onward, went through the kitchen, and I remember distinctly deciding I'm going to take note of everything in this room. So if or when I get back to my body, I can sort of treat this as an experiment and compare what I had seen and what the environment was like in this state to when I come back to my body and go downstairs. Because even in the state, I was in disbelief of what was happening. So I'm taking note of what lights are on, what the kitchen looks like, and I drift through the kitchen, and sure enough, I found my dad in the recliner, in his usual position, leaned back, mouth agape, snoring, with the television on. And so I float over. I'm like, oh, this is my chance. I'm going to try to interact with my dad. And there's a book on the nightstand right next to him. And I peer down, look at the page number 42. So I log that in my mind. I go to my dad and I go to reach for him. And as soon as I make contact with him, right back into my body, wide awake. There was never a transition of wakefulness to sleep, a sleep state to wakefulness. It was just an ever-present awareness and awakeness. So of course I'm just lying there in disbelief. I get up and I check everything, and every light that was on was still on. Every light that had been off in this floating experience was off downstairs. Everything remained in the same state. Of course, my dad was in the living room in his chair, reclined, snoring away. And of course, the big test for me was checking out this book that I had seen next to my dad. And sure enough, the book was open too. Page number 42. And for me, that was pretty much a complete validation. I mean, I knew in my experience that what happened was real because I had felt a consistent wakefulness and awareness. But having those things that I could compare later was just that much more validating for me. And it made me feel like I could share this experience with people because I had at least some sort of experimental data from this bizarre experience. So of course, the first thing I do is search online to see if anybody has had an experience like this. And this was 2008. So I don't even think I was using Google at that point. I think I was using Yahoo or Ask Jeeves or something. So it's a lot longer of a research process. I finally decided to search sort of the symptoms I was feeling and the vibration sensation. This is something that, of course, I've later come to discover is pretty much 100% consistent thing with people who experience out-of-body experiences. I did not know this at the time, so I started reading other people's reports and realizing that that was what my experience was. Totally changed my life, totally changed my immediate reality and my immediate headspace. After that experience, things started to turn around for me. I ended up finding direction, moving to Texas and starting a different chapter of my life. So it was definitely a turning point. It was also a realization, a firsthand realization for me that there is more to life than this physical meat and potatoes reality that we experience every day. That we're not just walking meat sacks, that there is something more. I mean, I've always believed this in theory, but to have an experience like this, there's a sense of peace that you get when you realize that your consciousness is separate from your body and will, I believe, continue after we dissolve into dust. I think it's just an example of the greater reality that is sort of the undercurrent of our normal everyday lives that's just seeps out once in a while, taps you on the shoulder and says, open your eyes. And don't forget the world is more weird and wonderful than you may have thought.
So that was Jeremy, John, and Chris of the Belief Hole podcast. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us, guys.
Yeah, those were some really interesting ones. And what's odd is that first story that Chris shared about seeing a shadow figure in the doorway of his bedroom when he was in bed. It's funny because we shared stories on their show as well. And it just happens that the story I shared was about my experience laying in bed, seeing a shadow figure in my bedroom looking at me. And that wasn't planned because that's not the story we were originally going to share with them. We changed that at the last minute. So it's just a real coincidence that that happened. But yeah, their childhood home sounds like a bit of a fascinating place.
I'm going to suggest one thing to you guys. Get a cat, because then things falling over or strange noises in other rooms, you can just, that's fine, it was the cat. If the cat's right in front of you...
well, I don't know, you'd still try and blame it on the cat. Especially, I mean, a house in the middle of the woods and the story where one of them is there on their own and the fridge door is opening and closing. Yeah. I mean, that is, yeah. I can see why it was so terrifying because you can't, go and get cut. When something like that happens, it may sound like a small thing, but you can't get away from the sense of sort of non-ordinariness of it. You can't just run into another room and have company and kind of get back to that sort of feeling of stability. You're there, stuck with it in the house on your own in the middle of the woods, and it sounds very, very isolating.
I'm not sure that we could get away with doing his solution to the not going into that room again. Like,
we don't have enough rooms.
Yeah, if we did that, we wouldn't have any rooms left.
No, houses in Britain are small, guys, really small. So the other thing that I wanted to say about this was the things they mentioned about the land. They mentioned that the house was built on an old village dumping ground in the 1800s.
My old family home was where Jack was.
This is exactly what I was going to say. It's really interesting because they were talking about how they wondered if it was if the land itself was a bit like a paranormal highway or crossroads or something like that, because it didn't seem very consistent. It didn't seem like the house felt dark all the time. Most of the time it felt homely. And then you just had these weird things that just popped up and weren't very consistent with the general feeling of the house. And yeah, it really made me think of your childhood home because, again, your childhood home, there was no real reason for there to be a haunting there. And yeah, incidentally, it was built on, it was a midden. It was a midden site. It was just outside the original town boundary walls. So basically, everybody, all the townspeople, the village people, just chucked their rubbish over the boundary wall, basically, and that's where it landed, on a midden heap. And I think, when you were digging in the garden, you used to dig bits of that midden heap up quite frequently.
All the time, yeah. You'd get, obviously, with things like that, the stuff nearer the top is the more recent. The further down you go, the older it is. But yeah, we'd dig up Victorian coins and marbles and bottles and all sorts. And I think we even found like Roman things as well. And those went, I know quite a few of the things we dug up went to the local museum. So we'd obviously got a few things of historical importance there.
So that raises the question then, is there something about a dumping ground? Is it a liminal space in that environment because nobody really goes there? Do you know what I mean? You've got a collection of discarded items, all with potential energy attached to them, all accumulated in a big heap in one place. But there's nobody's personal energy to kind of balance that out for years and years and years because it's just a place nobody goes. And then all of a sudden there's a house dropped on it.
Interesting. I'm going to have to look into this. This has tweaked something because I used to work in civil engineering and part of my job was surveying landfill.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time when you're finished, they just cap it and then eventually build on it. So potentially there's some huge sites out there with like housing estates and stuff on that may in future have some weird experiences if this is the case.
Wow.
So I'm going to have to see if I can find out where old landfill sites are.
And that's a really good point to look for as well, because we've come across in our paranormal research whole housing estates that are haunted.
Yeah, I was reading about one recently and that was what made me think, I wonder if that's that. So
because that's not something you really generally find out. It's not something that's much publicised when there's a housing estate that's been built on top of a rubbish tip.
No.
It's not. It doesn't make houses sell very well, does it?
No, well, there's a danger of subsidence as well because obviously a lot of the stuff rots down and eventually, and you've got methane and stuff that comes out from it. So you tend to have to wait quite a while after they've been capped to use them.
For sure.
But yeah, like they don't like to advertise it because there is no way in which that's a benefit.
So this has raised some really interesting questions, guys. That could be another whole vein of the paranormal that we have not yet explored. That could be one really important factor in hauntings that we just haven't taken account of yet.
So if you enjoyed listening to the guys from the Belief Hole podcast, then we do recommend that you go and check them out. I will put links in the show notes on the website, so please do give them a like, give them a listen, and let them know that we sent you.
Well, I'm afraid that is the end of the stories for this episode. And don't forget, if you have a story to share, we would love to hear it. Your stories are the heart and soul of Not Once for Yes, so please do consider popping over to our website at notonceforyes.com, sharing your story with us there. Of course, normally we'd be heading straight from our stories into the main segment of the show, such as a paranormal postcard or a feature story. We have a separate episode for that today, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show. Our main segment for this episode ended up being 2 hours long on its own. And just due to the upload file size, we've had to split it into 2 episodes because it was a bit ridiculous. So this is the end of this episode, your bonus bumper episode of Ghost Stories. And this second episode, our feature of the Screaming Skulls, is out right now. So if you want to, you can absolutely just pop on to episode 62 and listen to these back to back, or you can save it for another day. Either way, I really hope you enjoy our Screaming Skulls feature.
Thank you so much to all of our patrons, KOFY and Repod supporters, without whom we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And don't forget that you can check out our bonus content for 1 month free at the moment through Repod using the code FRIENDS at checkout when you become a member. Not Once VS is produced by my production company, Narrative Audio, and if you have a podcast and would like to outsource your editing and post-production, then please do get in touch either through Not Once VS or narrativeaudio.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you'll join us again soon on the next Not Once VS.